From Washington, this is the Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, September 9th. You're listening to the Macrocast. Tony Fratto with Hamilton Place Strategies. John Fagan, Brendan Walsh are partners in the Macrocast with Markets Policy Partners, both bringing this show to you every week for a look at macro. Little twist this way. It's a sort of a solemn Macrocast this week, guys. The passing of the Queen, I think it's dominating all the news, even the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ opening with moments of silence, where we should not forget that we always know that the head of state is actually is the prime minister that runs the government, but the head of the country is the Queen, and she's been an important figure for over 7 decades, which is kind of amazing. I think she beat the record a few years ago of Queen Victoria. Right. So just monarchs don't tend to have long reigns. Those two are by far, but I'm sure she never imagined that she'd be in 1952 when she was crowned. That in 2022 she would still be Queen. Is just amazing.
She's according to the Wikipedia, the oracle, the all-knowing oracle of Wikipedia, second longest serving monarch in history, or at least the modern era that we know about, second only to Louis XIV. And
I forget Louis XIV lasted that long.
It's 72 years and 110 days. She was 70 years and 214 days. That's just remarkable. And
Louis, two things you could say about Louis XIV. That's the Sun King, right? Louis XIV.
I believe so.
Sun King. Louis XIV is the Sun King. And, he didn't preside over the loss of the. He didn't have an empire and didn't preside over the loss of an empire either. In a way, I mean, as Queen Elizabeth II started, her reign begins after World War II, so after the greatest threat to the country. But the turmoil in the British Empire, the United Kingdom, over that time was pretty significant, and it's something we did just in preparation for this show. We were thinking in our production call, just thinking about what the size of the British Empire was in 1952, which was it had been said that the sun never set on the British Empire. It didn't set on the British. It was not setting on the British Empire at that time, if you still consider that Canada and Australia were significant parts of the empire at that time, and including lots of possessions in the Pacific and Africa, and it's not as big then as what's today. We were trying to come up with a little mind trick of saying what would be the GDP today. I don't think we put together the math on it, but
tally up South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and get Pakistan in there, and you've got
Hong Kong,
Malaysia, Sri Lanka, swaths of East Africa, and obviously possessions through the colonial possessions through the Caribbean, and that was 1952. Really, not exactly ancient history, and just a completely different era to think about. And and she obviously started her reign, as you said, Tony, at a time when England and the UK was still suffering the after effects of World War II. Read an article that was written about her platinum jubilee, and it cast a thought back to 1952. Butter, bacon, and meat were rationed in 1952. After and the economy was just a fifth of its current size. Just a remarkable period of time for her to be on the throne, and seeing the changes that occurred in England, for the better in many cases, and in other cases, some things that are clearly, obviously challenging the sceptered isle over recent years.
Yeah, there was in that post-war period, still the struggle which the UK had been, England, the Bank of England, and the British government had been, wanting to return to the gold standard, right? And the sort of going off the gold standard during World War II for a period of time, and rationing, and then this really quixotic determination to go back on the gold standard did not help their economy in that post-war period. It made it very, very challenging to match up monetary policy to what the needs of that government were. At that time, of course, the United States had all the gold, so it was really, really hard to have a gold-based currency when one country has most of the gold.
Right.
Acquired a lot of that gold, by making loans, and during the war, financing really two wars. We accumulated a great deal of gold, and so it was not a great system for the UK at that time.
Yeah, and other signifiers of the UK's evolution, some would say decline, but obviously changing status on the world scene. The Suez Crisis, 1956, is pointed to by historians as a seminal event in that showed really who was the in control. The superpower was the U.S., sole superpower, and the Europeans would take their cues increasingly on a geopolitical standpoint from U.S. policy through the Cold War. You can argue, this is it was a dialectic, waxed and waned in terms of that, but that was obviously something that happened very early in her reign as well, and certainly a big shift among many of the shifts that she saw during her reign.
There were some of the other challenges. So most of the empire, and just to be very, very clear on this, none of us are glorifying colonial empires. We're not looking back on it with nostalgia by any stretch. Just noting it as a historical fact that they did have these ownership or relationship with a lot of countries. By the late 50s, now they had already lost India. India had already claimed its independence at that time. By the early 60s, certainly, but most of the African countries and others, there was a wave of independence, and so that could contributed to the economic challenges. Even though the UK was in it was able to maintain a leadership position even with its challenges, and even with the falling apart of the empire, the Suez Crisis, which they come out on the bad end of, and yet Britain remains a power, an economic power throughout this entire period. It remains one of the largest economies in the world throughout the entire period, a leadership position. It's funny, when somebody had shown a side by side of the front page of the New York Times. I saw very early this morning, side by side the New York Times on the day that she accedes to the throne in 1952, and then the front page of the New York Times this morning. And I was looking at what other stories were on the front page of the New York Times on that day in 1952. And there's a great story about the Soviet Union blocking Italy's entrance to the United Nations. And this is, 7 years after the war. Russia with its veto on the Security Council. There's this great story about it. Well, the UK didn't have to suffer any indignities like that after the war. It was on the right side of the war, it was on the victorious side of the war. So even with this dissipation of the empire, and as an economic power, still had lots of great companies and enormous amounts of capital that it acquired over the years, and had these deep, rich, liquid capital markets in the city that kept it, even to this day, as one of the important economic countries of the world. And we still pay attention to the pound for very good reasons.
Absolutely. Just as an aside, I don't want to go back into the fraught territory of colonialism too deeply. But when I was in graduate school, I took a developmental economics class, and one of the factors which we put in regressions, whether to try to discern whether it was a significant factor, this was part of our assignment that we were given at the Kennedy School at the time, was to go back and control to see if it was statistically significant, the developmental outcomes based on who your colonial power was. Is it statistically significant that colonial possessions of the UK did better than colonial possessions of France, other European powers, the US, that sort of thing? This is obviously, this was back in the 90s.
Yep.
I mean, that kind of inquiry today would come with a little more pushback in terms of the kind of message that it would be sending. But it was a
there are clear examples
exercise. It was a worthy intellectual question.
In 1900, Argentina and Canada, from a statistical standpoint, were the exact same country. They had the same population, they had natural resources, and look at what happened over the next 100 years.
Yeah, and so in terms of whether rightly or wrongly, and whether you can statistically prove it, and that sort of thing, the sense that England had it had a system, right? And it was, when you think about the worldly philosophers of, John Smith, Keynes, these are all Brits, and they exported. This was in very real terms. This was contemporary. Certainly, these were contemporary with Queen Elizabeth.
Especially the legal system. I know you were a lawyer, but when you're setting up a business or writing a contract, you want it done in the UK or America, and nowhere else really has any legal standing, right?
Yeah, and there's a reason that obviously the City of London, the financial services you put your finger on it, Brendan. It's that legal certainty, that the courts, the institutions, the philosophical grounding in a free market capitalist, obviously, between Keynes and Hayek, and Hayek's not English, but Adam Smith and so forth. It was the breeding ground of so many of these theories and institutional capabilities that it exported around the world.
There were indignities, though, right? I mean, we had no doubt, right? I mean, Soros breaking the pound.
John and I are of Irish descent, so we know of one or two indignities.
We'll pull our punches on that front. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if you've seen this. The quote from, or it was. I saw it in the Irish Times. Is this? Reflection on the Irish view of the British monarchy, and they said it's like having a monarchy next door is a little like having a neighbor who's really into clowns and has daubed their house with clown murals and displays of clown dolls in each window, and has an insatiable desire to hear about and discuss clown-related news stories. But more specifically for the Irish, it's like having a neighbor who's really into clowns, and also your grandfather was murdered by a clown. Not the same.
Darkly.
Not the same. Yeah. Not the same jolly old English reverence for the crown in Ireland, but still, this ends up being the code on all of these discussions. And I admit, and I tweeted it out this morning, that it is admittedly a pretty bizarre thing to sort of cling to a monarchy and this institution of the British royal family in 2022. And as an American whose family comes from not here but southern Italy, we had our problems with the Bourbons, not the British. As an American, I don't mind having them around just for the entertainment value. I mean, they get married, there's pomp, they're in the box at Wimbledon, and they get into mischief. Fill the newspapers with things to read. We have celebrities for that. But it does drive a lot of economic activity, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think they get a return on the money that they spend on the royals just for?
Of course they do.
I think so too.
Oh, when I lived in the UK and I knew that portion of my taxes that I was paying went to the royal family, that just frosted me up whenever I thought about it. I tried not to think about it. But, however you feel about the royals, amongst the royals, obviously Queen Elizabeth was the one with the most poised grace, just unimpeachable, public persona and so forth. And there are all these little funny stories you mentioned in the changing of the coins, and as she's passed from the scene, now we have King Charles III, which is a little strange, and we'll wonder about that. And you also mentioned, Tony, the changing of the coins. As soon as you said that, I flashed back to a story that I'd read. And obviously her face is on the bills, and it was from one of the butlers at Buckingham Palace. Started to blab to the tabloids. He said that Princes William and Harry used to refer to the pound notes a 10, because they are different colors, obviously, to denote them there. It's as a 10-pound note as a blue granny, a brown granny. I mean, a 5-pound note's a blue granny, 10-pound note is a brown granny, and the 50-pound note was a pink granny. And when they were asking for their allowance, they would always vie for the pink granny.
Definitely, they won't come.
So,
now they what is it? What will it be? Like the pink poppy, whatever they call them. I don't know what they call them.
Not that I'm sitting here following the latest news from the royals, but I caught, apparently there's a sense that Prince Charles will abdicate in the not too distant future for in favor of Prince William.
I don't believe it.
I don't have any idea why, but
everyone's on. Well, look, I remember from when I was, as early as I can remember, the stories of that the Queen would abdicate in favor of Charles, and of course, and especially after the marriage to Diana and children, and before things get really bad, there was a lot of talk about abdication at that time, and 30 years later, she's still the Queen. But money, as a former Treasury guy, I do love the money. Like the changing of the money is always like it's great. I've only known British pounds to have the Queen's images on it, so it'll be interesting and fun to watch. The changeover that will happen, I think they need to do I believe they need to do a new portrait. He is actually on one minted coin already, which I think is actually commemorative. But I learned a little tidbit, which is that whenever the monarch changes, the direction that the monarch is looking changes. So she was looking right to our left. He'll be looking left to our right.
And now is William, does he take over as Prince of Wales?
He'll be Prince of Wales. It's a pretty good trade up for Wales, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they've been saddled with Charles all these years, and now they get William, and it's a pretty good Kate, right? It's pretty good trade up for them.
Say what you want about Prince Charles, but there was a video. It's on. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, where he was giving a speech somewhere, and a person ran out of the crowd and pointed a gun at him. It actually it ended up being a flare gun, but you wouldn't be able to tell that in the moment.
Yeah.
And his reaction was to turn his head ever so slightly toward the would-be attacker without moving any other muscle in his body. As the guy was tackled, he paused momentarily and then continued with his speech. He didn't duck. He didn't jump behind the podium. He he deigned to slightly tilt his head over in the direction of the weapon being pointed at him, and immediately carried on with his speech. The keep calm and carry on, I guess. That's
the way you embody it. That's it.
More than
right?
just a slogan.
Yeah. They get critical. I mean, it's interesting because Charles, he's 73 years old now, right? So he's pretty old, to be taking the reins of his reign. And but it's interesting that there's this really constitutional role of the head of state to not take positions on big things, and including Brexit. I don't know what Charles's views were on Brexit. We knew that the Queen, whatever her views were kept to herself on things like Brexit. I can't remember if he expressed himself on Brexit or not, but he expressed himself on lots of other issues having to do with climate and a number of other things, and he did so knowing that he was not the sovereign yet. But there is a fairly lengthy record of his views on lots of things. So it'll be interesting to see him go back to this role of not, where the royal makes no pronouncements on any big issues.
It is. It must be, the temptation to get into impose yourself and your will on the political arena. I'm sure at some points it was. I'm sure that she made her views known more privately and perhaps obliquely, but I'm sure that there is a degree of restraint, and hopefully it continues. That one would imagine that would continue. But there was certainly plenty in the Brexit episode to comment on and think about, and taking a step back and thinking about the way that the UK economy has changed. I mean, we talked about money. It is funny going over there. The pound, it's nominally, like if you go in, anything that would cost like $10 in the US costs £10 in the UK, right? It's like things aren't lower just because the pound is it tends to be above parity to the dollar. And so everything, if you're there at $1.40 to the pound or $1.30 to the pound, it's just like buying a beer with a 30% markup or 40% markup. It's a very expensive city, and this is and the pound is still obviously above parity. It's the weakest it's been since 1998. But thinking about the way that the economy has changed behind the value of the pound, obviously the fluctuations thereof, but even a cursory inspection of the economic makeup of the UK, far less industrialized, much more financialized, and a truly service-based economy, with the city of London, that financial hub, being really an outsized contributor. Brexit has taken some of the wind out of that sails, but it's a this has in a world where they've sort of deepened the divorce from the continent, and they're a globalization power. They always have been. And we see a world in which globalization is in retreat in so many different ways. And as countries tend to look inward, the U.S. has so many different resources and natural resources and space and people and immigrants and that sort of that sort of stuff. The UK, if you're sort of looking inward and trying to build up your reshoring capacities and that sort of stuff, the UK has a more potentially more challenging kind of baseline to be working from here. And
no question. And your point, especially on on their markets, of just what a durable powerhouse that is, right? I mean, you could you wonder why other countries' capital markets haven't developed enough to challenge the UK. I mean, the only one that successfully has is the United States. It's only New York has not challenged, far surpassed, but the UK is only the next most important capital market in the world. Everything else is a giant step down, and why France and Tokyo and Germany and others have never been able to do it is that they don't have those institutions, they don't have the tradition, they don't have the accumulation of capital in the same ways also. But it is a very durable economic powerhouse for the UK, and it's one of the reasons why they will always be relevant. It's hard to see it deteriorating very much.
Right. Even if we've seen this move toward, I want to quote President Putin these days, but Putin said what a lot of financial market participants are thinking, which is we're entering an era of real assets, of resources, of metals, energy, and the possession of these is going to be, the pendulum is swinging back in terms of what feeds your national strength, your national power, and in a world where you've got fragmented supply lines, reshoring, great power competition, a scramble for resources. The resources that you have, within the homeland are a greater source. Of course, that's a self-serving argument for a country like Russia, which is blessed in natural resources space, and and so on and so forth. But the UK is the center of trading of all that. That's where it trades. And where's the insurance for the ships?
Yep.
It's in the UK, and to a great extent in the US too. But that is what keeps them in the game. And it's a very, looking at the way that if you have, but there are issues with it. And I think when we look back at, you look back at Queen Elizabeth's reign, she is inextricably tied up with another powerful female figure in the UK. It's Prime Minister Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher.
Right. Yeah.
She wasn't around for 70 years, but her 11-year stint, 79 to 90 in the prime ministership, and through a transition, one of the biggest transition periods that happened during Queen Elizabeth's reign was presided over by Margaret Thatcher. And it really was that was, marked a real turning point in the deindustrialization and financialization of the economy. And, are there arguments that went too far? Are there arguments that, the pendulum is now swinging back? I think you can make that argument pretty forcefully. Prime Minister Truss is an acolyte, an avowed acolyte of Thatcher. She styles herself after there are all these pictures of her dressing like the same way and doing the same things, and as Margaret Thatcher's, and she's obviously expressed her philosophical fealty to Margaret Thatcher's free market ethos. But what did she do on her third day in 10 Downing Street? She announced a cap of massive intervention in energy markets.
Yeah.
And, and a redoubling of investment in, North Sea oil and, and lifting the ban on fracking. And it's interesting how the bookends of history around different eras can sometimes appear, and you have these strange echoes, and maybe this is the Margaret Thatcher 2.0 coming in and conducting one of the biggest interventions in anti-free, by any metric, anti-free market policies in decades in the UK. Yeah. It is a fascinating thing to
it is, and these are, and look, I mean, for all heads of state, that these challenges are pretty huge, and at least for the near term, I mean, we'd like to see them being able to stick to sort of free market principles on these things, but they are unusual times also, it's an easy case to make given COVID and Ukraine and their dependency and Brexit at the same time. It's a very unusual dynamic period for the UK, and so creative policy is maybe the answer. And as we learned, though, creative policy could have long tail consequences, and we're dealing with those things here in the United States. So they may be the exact right thing in the moment for a whole lot of reasons, but we'll be paying attention to those long tail consequences also.
Yeah, it's kind of like reminiscent of President Nixon's "We're all Keynesians now," although I believe that's a misquote, but very much ascribed. He said something to that effect when he enacted price controls in the early 70s as a arch conservative, resorting to price controls. Sometimes the political realities just dictate what you have to do. Whether the policy is properly crafted, I think there's a lot to argue about there. But what the alternative is, as we're seeing on the continent as well, the impact on household, basically the cost of living crisis, the impact on businesses, and that's what Putin wants to do. That's the whole game.
Hey, John, if we can make a transition, Brendan. Speaking of prices and inflation, we had and get back to a little bit to U.S. Macro and monetary policy. We had Chairman Powell speaking yesterday at CATO Institute. He spoke quite a bit longer than the 8-minute remarks at Jackson Hole. But he didn't confuse matters, right? I think he did a pretty good job of reinforcing where the bank's commitment. Lael Brainard's comments earlier this week also. This is sounding like repeating of the their own whatever it takes to conquer inflation commitments. They're making sure that there's no confusion over this, right?
Yeah, that's certainly what it seems like, he's obviously signaling at least 75 basis points rate hike at the decision on the 21st. That's essentially priced into the market. But the 21st isn't tomorrow, right? We still have some very consequential stuff coming in between now and then. And next week features the consumer price index for August and the producer price index for August. And those are going to be meaningful. Those are going to be really meaningful data points along this road.
The headline, the August CPI headline, is likely to be negative. We know that used car
month on month negative
on the month. And then we also know what happened with gas, which was down a lot. So we'll probably be under 8% on a year-over-year basis for August. Which is a steep decline from the 9.2 we saw at the highs.
We're beginning to see, the bank. It's not necessarily going to be dispositive for the way that the Fed is going, but the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of Korea, coming off of their most aggressive rate hikes, and saying we're still moving purposefully and fighting inflation, but we don't have to have these big panicky looking jumps in we're moving a little bit more deliberately. The risks of the balance of risks between inflation and growth are just naturally changing, and we see that around the world. If you look at anything from TIPS break evens, the market-based gauges of inflation expectations, if you're looking at commodity prices, if you're looking at freight rates, if you're like used car prices, you name it, aside from energy, it's the signifiers of these kind of fundamental price pressures are way off their highs. And
energy outside of oil, which has come down precipitously in the last few weeks.
That's true. Yeah, oil prices aren't. It's not like cheap at the pump. But we're not at $130 a barrel.
That's right.
We're in the 90. We're at 90, and which is that's
still elevated. Yeah, but
right.
Yeah, but we're still in an uncertain world right now too, in a lot of ways, both geopolitical and where demand is, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think what we've been talking about with our clients really is if the Fed is not going to hike 75 basis points at every meeting, right? It's gonna dial it down, and that is coming in the second half of the year. And one of the things that we've obviously seen, and Minnesota Fed President Kashkari basically said this was, after our July meeting, we were unhappy that the market was focused on a downshift. And so the messaging has really gotten forcefully hawkish, just, at a time when inflation is actually like looking better and more growth indicators are showing softness, at a time when the rhetoric could be moderating, it's not. And I think that that's, part of the thinking is sort of rhetorical hawkishness allows them to execute sort of a fighting retreat, so to speak, from 75 basis points to 50. The market, when they go to 50, they don't want the market to get too excited about it. They don't want the market, running up and taking away some of the financial conditions tightening that they've been doing. They don't necessarily need the stock market to collapse, but they want to curb your enthusiasm, I think, is what they want to be exeking as they dial it down from 75 to 50. And
do you guys have a view on there's when this is part of this is the if you're following Larry Summers and Paul Krugman and Claudia Sahm and a few others on Twitter on the debate on where unemployment needs to go in order to have a meaningful impact on stifling wage growth. Do you have views on this on this debate? I mean, I tend to think that I don't like these sort of doctrinaire kinds of modeling on it, because I do think there are idiosyncratic factors, and Larry would say, oh well, there's the team what was it, not transit, what's the term,
team transitory.
Transitory, thank you. Team transitory. He'll call me team transitory, but I think it's undeniable that there are certain transitory factors. Whether they're big or not big is the question. And that's why some of the modeling, I think I don't have a lot of faith in.
I think that the way that we see it is it's been a very Fed driven market. The Fed has been like the main event for asset price inflation and reflationary dynamics in the economy. And my sense is that if the Fed is targeting, I'm sure that, not going to question Larry Summers' economic models. I'm sure that his models are flawless. But basically, if you were trying to, if in our conception, if you're trying to get that unemployment rate to a more optimal level that's disinflationary, you have to, way before you get there, you're going to absolutely annihilate financial markets. And so financial markets are like the trailer. If the economy is like the van pulling the financial markets are the ones that move around, and they will that tail will begin to wag the dog if you get into a situation where, the Fed is hiking 75, inflation's coming down, and they're like, we're going to just keep hammering this. And we've got to if they've got economic targets, the markets are going to, I think, force the issue, because you get a situation in which you get the credit issues, you get instability in risk assets, you get liquidity problems in treasuries. These are markets that are very, attuned to Fed liquidity. And I think it's really hard for Fed policy to achieve or Volcker-like economic outcomes without really first having a financial markets problem.
Yeah, I think that's and by the way, I think it's a great debate, right? I mean, obviously we don't have to make, at least I'm not making investment decisions on it, and I'm not making policy rate decisions on it. So I just get to be a watcher and a commentator. So, but it is, I think it's a challenging environment to sort that out on where that's going. But I think your broad point, though, John, I think we always, these debates always end up being, battles on the head of a pin, we're like talking about precision but your point, that your broad point, step back and say, look, it's not 75 basis points increases forever. At some point they're coming off, and we're probably getting there, right? Unless we see some surprisingly bad inflation prints, we're probably there. And that's probably the right way to look at it. So if you're thinking about the next 18 months, it's I think it's more benign than the previous 18 months, right?
Yeah, that's what we think. We think that the second half of this year is going to feature a tradable rally, and peaking and trending, inflation trending lower, and the Fed downshifting from 75 to 50 to 25, maybe not stopping, but we think that formulation is fuel for a risk asset rally. We are concerned about 2023 because the market's pricing in rate cuts. And we think that, the Fed is having a hard enough time going from 75 to 50. They're so freaked out about inflation. The bar for rate, and they're telling us the bar for rate cuts is enormously high. We're worried that the economy in 2023 will need rate cuts and the Fed will not feel like they can deliver.
I think the market is going to not necessarily even, I agree with you, like rate cuts are a long way off. I think smaller rate increases are going to feel like rate cuts to the market.
In the near term, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. All right, guys. What else do you have coming out next week? Any other data we should be paying attention to?
We were going to have the Bank of England, but it got put off by the the morning period. U.S. CPI, Chinese growth data. Last set of growth data looked awful.
Yeah.
So we'll see if there's any improvement there.
Definitely. All right, guys. How do you do this? How do we, long live the king? Queen is dead. Long live the king, right?
Right. I guess so. That's right.
Queen is Dead is one of my favorite albums. Also, I just want to say.
It's been that one tonight.
But long live the king. All right, guys. See you next week on the Macrocast.
Thank you for listening to the Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.